Right. We're going to be looking at the site of Saveock in Cornwall. Yes. No, you wouldn't have heard of it. It's one of those sites that's been excavated over 19 years. And there's one or two little bits that are interesting about the site. This site itself is very close to. I've been reminded there's a certain way of saying this word. Chysauster. Pete told me, yeah. Chysauster. That's apparently the proper way. Chysauster. Yeah.
How's it spelled?
That's not how it's spelled. Okay, we'll just move on to that in a short while. Right. So Chysauster, if we bring in a map, and this has all been so well planned today, and we've even got maps and stuff. Right, that's a Chysauster stuff. And where the site we're going to be looking at is here, and Chysauster is over here. Right, so we're looking the southwest is Chysauster, and the site that we're looking at today is Saveock. These are both Iron Age sites, and they're in the area of the excursion that will be taking place in April next year. And because Chysauster is technically a Roman site, Alan will be happy. Well, when I say a Roman site, it's like a site that was used in the Roman period. So technically it's a Roman site.
It was around at that time.
It was around at that time, yeah. So the one thing I wanted to do over the next 4 or 5 weeks is obviously continue what we're doing, looking at current places that are receiving archaeological investigation at this minute. This site is being excavated now at this moment, alongside Alan's Vindalander, which he's examining today. And he'll be telling us all about that next week. And I want to sort of elaborate on what the Iron Age means, and next week we will elaborate on what the Roman period means. And then we'll look at what the Mesolithic means. And, as part of the lecture that we're doing, areas that are being excavated at this moment. So it takes us to Cornwall. We haven't actually looked at Cornwall in any of the lectures we've been doing recently. We've looked at everywhere else other than Cornwall. We've looked at Ireland a couple of times, Scotland about 6 or 7 times, England the rest. But I wanted to look at Cornwall. There were some complaints by one single individual from the Barry class, Peter, that we haven't done Cornwall at all. I thought, right, we've got to visit Cornwall just to keep him happy. He's a guy you should not upset. So the lectures have been going really well recently because Lynn hasn't been here. So, but they are going so well today because you're here, Lynn. Do you see what I did there? Because it's almost as if the lectures can flow without her, but they cannot continue without her either. Is that hole I've got into?
Yes. Yes. Stop.
Right. Chysauster itself is one of those wonderful examples of Iron Age archaeology. We don't really look at it in a great deal today, but I wanted to sort of do a little bit of comparison with the sense that some unusual things still survive across Cornwall that are being examined today. And they've actually started doing some reconstruction work at Chysauster, and they're actually doing reconstruction work and understanding of what's in the archaeology at Saveock as well. So I didn't know what you were doing there, Chris. She started stripping her clothes off.
Well, she always does.
So one thing I've been particularly saying and stating and elaborating on is the rights and wrongs and wherefores of what a roundhouse is and it isn't, and what it could be and what we don't know. This is an interesting reconstruction of a roundhouse, right? And guess what? They chucked a window into it. So the roundhouse is a really good, interesting reconstruction where you've got a really steep roof, a very, very steep roof indeed, on the reconstruction of Saveock, based on the archaeology. and these sort of roof beams in places run all the way down to the ground. You've got a lovely wattle framework and uprights supporting the diagonal timbers. A nice doorway area, and they've gone and chucked the window in there. And then I have a lecture off Peter and Barry, but they wouldn't have had windows, and I'm thinking, yeah, I just want to tell you this. I wouldn't have had windows, but I visited a site in Jersey, he said, that they had this wonderful reconstructed village, and they put windows in them. And it was explained the reason why there's windows in there, so that when people get in there, they get an impression of what the buildings are like without the museum having to use electricity to light the inside. Which sort of goes against the grain, really. But anyway, so what I want to do is I'm going to pick out the Chysauster link, and I'm going to pick out what we can learn from pollen analysis. It's a new one on us. And what we can learn from other areas of archaeology. What does the flint mean, say, on an archaeological site? And sort of little conclusions. Still things that we haven't done. I'm still looking for things that we haven't done and covered. Those little sort of bits. We know where that is. And what I'm going to do is show you, keep that in the background.
Yeah, just a bit different, isn't it?
Yes, it's very different, Kathy. Yeah, it's extremely different. If you hide that bit there, it looks very different.
Yeah, the walls aren't as high as the ones.
They're not as high, but when you stand up inside, the thing is when you stand up inside. So if you take the wall there, and this overlooks. By the time you go inside, your head is only touching a little bit of the roof inside. So it's that sort of that effect. Yeah, it is very, very different. And we can't say whether that's right or wrong or not.
It uses an awful lot of material to make a roof like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, you'd think they would have sort of done a hitched one.
Now that's a very interesting. Yeah, they're using a lot of material to actually build something like this. A hell of a lot of material, and it makes you think. And how far do we experiment with archaeology? And I think we need to keep on experimenting because we've just got no idea how these buildings work. We've really got no idea. They've done these, as been described by a couple of you guys, about visiting St Fagans at this minute, where they've got the Bronze Age buildings, Iron Age buildings at St Fagans, Iron Age actually. And they're saying that they go in there and they've got these huge open spaces and the ground is really dusty and they've got sort of a fire in the middle and so on and a big entranceway in, and I'm thinking, why can't we just try and not pander to the public and just try and give an experience?
It's not a real archaeological experiment then, is it, if they change things?
It's not, and I just... Actually, what has been suggested, and I've got to write this down to remind myself that this has been suggested. What we're thinking of doing with the valleys class, right? Michelle's got a huge allotment which takes up about an acre at the side of the Rhondda Valley, like everybody in the valleys does. People just have an acre allotment. It's just the way things happen in the valleys because it's just loads of space. And she's got this allotment, and one of the people in my values class, he said, why didn't we reconstruct the roundhouse? And one of the others said, well, we're going to need planning permission for that. We said, no, you're not, because all these allotments have all these little buildings on them. You go to where these allotments are, right, and people put up all these sheds and all these things and all the rest of it. So forget planning permission. It's not going to be up for a long time. But I'm thinking, we discussed this and we thought, right, yeah, that would be an interesting project. So if that does come off, I expect one or two of you to come up and give us a hand. Even with the projectile throw-in of balls of clay full of dung and straw and hair, and grind it in, get it in between your nails and just chuck it at the wattles.
Can you wear it with
There you go. What's that?
Can you wear it with the gloves?
In your case,
Get
yes.
your marigolds out.
Yeah.
In your case, yes. But Lynn wants the real experience.
Including the shit.
Well, yeah,
Essential
including-
ingredient.
You've got to
Yes.
make it properly.
Hang on, didn't I say done? Yeah, that. Okay, let's say it. Including the shit. Yeah, I was just saying done because, you know,
Yes.
yeah, and then you just lower the.
Raising the tone, yes.
No, lowering,
that's
raising.
Kathy, that's
Yeah,
typical.
that is Kathy.
Typical Kathy.
Yeah, it is typical Kathy, yeah. It's like spending the night in a brothel with Kathy every time. Right, okay. Right. So the site at Saveock Water is a site that takes us from the Mesolithic period, so we're looking at 8,000 years ago, all the way until the 1600s. And we're going to do the 1600s bit straight away. They've it become a National Geographic article a couple of years ago where they found these huge pits that had been dug in the 1600s. Yeah, 400 years ago, not 1600 years BC, 400 years ago. These huge pits in the ground, and they'd been lined with hides, and they'd been loads of bits of bone and stuff had been placed into them, and people said, "Oh, this has got to be evidence of witchcraft in Cornwall." But then again, you look at much earlier evidence from other sites within the area, and this sort of lining of pits in the ground is not an unusual thing. And lining of pits in the ground is to keep things from rotting, or is to bring on rotting to create silage, or it might be for storage of liquids, or a whole range of different things. Just because today we find these weird sort of holes in the ground with skins in them all the rest of it are full of bones and stuff, doesn't mean to say that that was their original use. You know, it's just like I know this is going to sound a bit of a joke. There's a police station in Barry that's being converted into an Islamic mosque, right? So just think in 1,000 years' time when they're excavating it, I'll think, my God, this Islamic mosque had police had cells. They had police cells in here, amazing. And you're thinking, but no, you can think of it in another way there. But you're thinking actually, Islamic mosques don't have police cells in them because the building was converted from a police building, you know, and had a different use to begin with. So it's all those changes in history. We only have an image of the past. That's all we've got, and that image is amongst loads of other stuff. And it's just, all you can say, it's just a picture, not to take away. This is all this is, it's just a picture, that's all we've got. This is all we have. You know, it's like you go into this wall, we never ever look at this stuff. This is extremely boring to some members of the public. They might come in here and think, right, all it is a mosaic floor, but you think actually that mosaic floor had nice furniture on it and it had a wall, and it may have had really nice windows and had beautiful fresco painted around the wall, and people lived and breathed in there, and they told poetry, and there was a wonderful roof, and other parts of the building had an upper course system. However, all we've got is that image, and unfortunately, when all we've got is that image, what takes away from that site is the bodies that were found beheaded, associated with that floor level, bodies scattered around that floor level at the Roman site at Caermead, and that's all we think about it, instead of actually thinking, before the bodies were placed in there, for 100 or so years, or however long the mosaics were used for, it was for something else, and that's the thing about history. We've got to see it as multifaceted and not one tone. It's like somebody turning around and saying, actually, last week I was a gynecologist, I've decided to change my career, I've decided to teach into schools, and you're thinking, one minute you're working in a hospital, one minute you're teaching in schools. That's just not right. But it is right, because that's what humanity is. It's ever changing, ever evolving, ever mutating. And with this site at Saveock, it's there's a little bit of a subtext to it. There's some really weird things there. For example, they found a rectangular lined pond or pool or whatever they've described it as. I see a pool here, and then you see pond somewhere else. It's a stone-lined area, right? And this is an interesting, very interesting thing. In the summer months, this stone-lined pool, lined with mineralised stone, which would be locally found. It's all nicely arranged. In the summer months, it's dry. But in the winter months, it's full of water because there's a natural spring that exudes its natural springness to the surface. In the winter months. And you can think, oh, well, it's a pool that's taking water, and in the winter months, and you can take the water and stuff. But when you think about it, the idea that the water is suddenly appearing in the winter months is magic. It is magic, you know. You go along the coastline of the Vale of Glamorgan around, going down to is Coedbach, Hillfort, further up along the Vale of Glamorgan coastline. And as you go in towards it, in the summer months the ground is dry. In the winter months you've got all these springs shooting water up to the surface, and you're thinking, that's magic, isn't it? Because in the summer months there's no water, in the winter months there's water, and you're thinking in the room, but that's obvious, and it's not as obvious as you think, because there's some years where that water's not going to spring to the surface. Look at the example of the River Nile. There are times in history that the real River Nile did not flood. At those times when the River Nile did not flood, that is when people starve. And when the River Nile floods again, life is brought back to the landscape. This is how people interpreted the past. This is how we should interpret the past. This is what their past was like. And when you look at somewhere like Saveock, they've there's lots of verbal stuff today, actually, and you look at the fact that they've excavated, and there's a Mesolithic camp there. There's a Mesolithic dwelling there. There's a Mesolithic landscape there, and you're thinking there's a camp, there's buildings there in the Mesolithic period. People didn't live in permanent places in the Mesolithic period, and that goes back to the other week where we mentioned Star Car, and I said actually, what is permanence? What is permanence? To some people, permanence is living in a place for more than a year. Some people live in an area of St. Athan, they'd be happy to be living there for 2 years. They think this has been permanent for me for 2 years. And other people might say that's not permanent. Permanent is when you're living in a house all your life, for the entire lifetime. Unfortunately, what we do, we put modern our own perspectives on the past to try and understand the past. Just like time travel and the Borg. You silly boy! Do you know, these phones are supposed to be so good, right? It's taken him 5 minutes to turn it off. What is that?
Oh, I don't know. It's just a text message.
Right, anyway, if you had the TARDIS then, that would have been perfect.
Your house is ready.
No, I wish it was.
Anyway, moving on.
Star Car was seasonal, by the way. When I got home, I knew I'd got something about Star Cars on my phone, so I booked it. And they analysed the bones, and they fitted with Antarctica.
Gordon Child's excavations in 1951 were temporary, but you've got the other site there, which
yes, but you've got the others now, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was an analysis done only a few years ago on the earlier excavation bones, and they did all sorts of...
Yeah, I agree with you, but other stuff there was permanent. Anyway, moving on. So, just what we'll do, we're going to stay with this image, but it's been up there a while, so what we're going to do, where's my little cursor? It's still okay. I'm obviously at this point I'm not upsetting Lynn, she's not getting angry with me, so things are working okay. So Mesolithic object, late Mesolithic, Neolithic sort of flint as well. Lots of these types of things have been found on the site. We'll be looking at a little bit of analysis of this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back. And here we go. So what they've when you look at little excavations like this, you look at the Mesolithic stuff, evidence of early settlements, permanent settlements, depending on your definition of permanent. And you've got the Neolithic evidence with this weird pool which is lined, which exudes water in the winter months. And something else that would be very important to find on a Cornish site, which would be evidence of tin smelting. Now, why would this be important? When we go across the country, we always say that tin itself is mined in Cornwall, and that wonderful tin is then exported around Britain and then exported to the continent. But at which place is the tin smelted? When you're presuming that it's coming from Cornwall, and you're presuming there's some kind of manufacturing process going on in Cornwall, and it's quite happily going with the fairies everywhere, But unfortunately, it's actually getting to reality. The reality is, what were they doing with the tin after they were mining it in the Bronze Age? What were they doing with it? Were they just chucking it in huge buckets and putting it on boats, and then somebody takes it somewhere to refine it? That's the right word, to smelt it. And actually what they are finding is that in the Bronze Age, at this site at Saveock, they've actually got a furnace, evidence of a furnace with residue that they're smelting, not bronze, but tin. They're refining tin on the site. Now that's one thing you don't usually hear. And we've also got as well, alongside this furnace, that they've got residue of tin smelting, and obviously they think that they've got evidence that copper, this is a bronze, some kind of a bronze furnace. So one of those early sites that they're actually putting the two materials together, the revolution that is the Bronze Age. What came first? Were they making things out of tin and then copper and putting the things together, or was it just copper and they thought we'll chuck tin in there and that's what we were going? Those are the real questions that they're looking at now, and it might be one or two of another. And then this is the bronze. This is the wonderful Bronze Age evidence, which is directly above the hearth. A hearth, which is then above this wonderful pool that we've mentioned. So you've got various bits of evidence at the site, giving you continuity for many thousands and thousands of years. And this is why I just wanted to look at one or two of these gems from across the country, which we've actually been doing. So what they've the evidence that they found from the Mesolithic period, for example, is that they lived alongside a riverbank, which is typical, similar to Star Karl, and strangely enough, they found the dwellings. They found a platform. The platform, Kathy, light bulb moment. The platform itself in the Mesolithic period, maybe 8,000 years ago, was densely packed to create the platform using a green clay layer, which would act, as a damp proofing layer. And they've then found stakes driven into this layer to create the buildings. And that's the type of evidence that we see not so far later when we look at the site of Skara Brae on Orkney, where lying underneath as a damp-proof membrane at Skara Brae is this sort of bluey type of clay layer. Okay, interpretation between green and blue, whatever. But they're doing the same thing at Skara as a membrane, as a waterproofing layer, as they've actually got at this Mesolithic site. And then somebody jumps in and actually says, where's the link between these two sets of people? There's one in Orkney and there's one set of people in Cornwall. And then you're thinking, well, actually, there's no link, because there's 1,000+ years between these two sites and so on. And it's likely that the jury is out on what's really going on. But when you think about this, is the way the human mind evolves, and this is something that I'm sure you've studied this bit, Keith, right? Just before the Second World War, the Germans thought that they were developing. They thought they could beat everybody in the nuclear race to create the first reactor, and the Germans were thinking about fusion and all these wonderful things and the idea of splitting the atom. They thought they were the first, but secretly the Americans were doing it as well. And then the Russians were thinking about it, and maybe somebody else was, and these people were completely independent, and maybe by 1947 the Germans would have had a fusion reactor, and then the Americans with the Manhattan Project would have come to the same conclusion within a couple of months, and then the Russians would have done it. And these people were working independently.
Yeah, but they weren't, were they?
Hmm?
They had these flies coming backwards and forwards and people jumping ship.
Shh! That's not what I want to know, right? That's not what... You're probably right, Kathy, but the point I'm trying to make is that when we look at history and archaeology, we can evolve things in one area which is completely independent of another area, and there's no real link. It seems there's a link.
Pyramids in South America.
Exactly. This is what we're talking about.
If you've known since 2000 BC that putting a layer of puddled clay underneath your house or in your pond acts as a water lining, then all your relatives know, and then so on and so on.
And it spreads across the country.
Yeah,
It spreads across the country. But the point we're trying to make here, and maybe this is a subtlety that I'm trying to put in there. It's not. It's just taken that you're going to do it. That's what we're trying to say. We just do it. There's no cultural link between Orkney and Cornwall. But somebody may have travelled, or they may have just evolved in their mind that if you put this thick clay layer across there.
Yeah, they're trading to get some tin, and they see these happening. Oh God, you want to stop that dam? All you need to do is
Or maybe
get
not.
this clay and go like this, a little.
Or maybe it's an evolution from somewhere else. What I'm trying to say, there's no actual concrete link. That's what I'm trying to say. There's no actual concrete link. It's just the way things evolve. It's the way the human mind evolves.
If one person can think of it somewhere, then somebody else completely different can think of the same way.
Exactly,
Human
in that
mind
same
works
wavelength.
the same
This
way.
is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. The word is determinism. Humans determine how they evolve.
Well, autism's been researched in two completely different places at the same time, independently.
And why not? Because and this thing itself here is that you know, I've been saying, and I've been mentioning for about a year that we've got evidence of levels of disability in the past and so on, and you get this silly article in the Daily Mail saying exactly what I've been saying. But this is This is the epitome of what I'm saying. These human beings get to the same conclusions if the right environment is there to do so. The point being, if you're going to be warring and killing each other all the time, humanity would have never evolved to where it is today. We wouldn't have been able to think, oh, let's line the buildings and stuff. And the other thing as well is, this is an interesting one again, right? For for Neanderthals, as in the Shannon site here, which was the first example, the Shannon man itself, which was found in northern Iraq in 1956. I think any of that's here, but when they originally found that individual, they eventually found out that this individual lived into his 50s. He was critically crippled. He was blind, deaf, and this guy really, really struggled, but lived into his 50s, right? Now they're finding other examples here. Other examples of Neanderthals being disabled, right? If these people are so backwards and so, Neanderthal, how are they able to sort of care for their loved ones? And then that sort of goes completely against the grain. But they were able to do it, and they're probably able to do it because they had a society to do it. They've got a society to do that. Our direct ancestors, our humanoid Homo sapiens sapien ancestors, were probably doing the same thing somewhere else. These Neanderthals were painting caves here, and these people were painting them there. There was no links, but this is the way the mind evolved. It tells you again that Neanderthals were equally as intelligent as any other humanoids on the planet. And back to what we've all been saying, that these Neanderthals interbred with Homo sapiens sapiens, and this is where we are today. Let's carry on. Lynn wants to say something, I don't know. She's going to say, I've really missed coming along here, and I'm so privileged to be here today. Tell you what, if you two had been here last week, it would have been quite a full room.
It was last week.
Yeah, it was. We had John and Goff and Jan, and we had Andrea and Sarah and Peter and Dennis and Alan. No, I don't mean it in that way. Where is everyone? Anyway. But
we were listening to talks on Catherine, weren't we? Catherine the Great.
Oh, cool.
And Amber.
Did they and the Amber Room?
You mentioned it, I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly.
Smaller
Where is
than
it
I
now?
thought.
Yeah. Oh, the reconstructed Amber Room. Yeah.
Tiny.
It's the latest thing that went up in flames in Königsberg when that was bombed.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
I got it in my back, taking on it.
Well, the whole Amber Room, in boxes still, with swastikas on the boxes. Yeah. As they landed in your garden in Junkers, JUA
Yeah,
dates.
exactly. Dropped them by parachute.
Yeah, exactly. There's also another interesting thing, which not only with this Mesolithic clay layer, they've got a Neolithic clay layer as well, which is precisely like, which is in the same time frame as Skara Brae. But they've also, as an innovation they've actually found this platform again, moving from the Mesolithic into the Neolithic period above. They've actually found, very similar to the evidence at Skara Brae, they've got a stone-lined drain. They've got drainage in the Neolithic period. Now these people are meant to be backwards, and they've got drains in the Neolithic period. And we're going into the medieval period, and most people were likely to have just been able to put their human waste outside in the garden. You don't have drains and stuff. So these things, it tells you that there's lots of things in history that we don't rightly and really understand. So what I'm probably going to do is I want to but we're gonna have a break because you're all aware we've got to finish early today. much earlier. That's why I wanted to start earlier. That's why I got here earlier. And that's why I had to go back outside and move the vehicle. But anyway, that's life. So one thing with this side, we mentioned bits about the archaeology. I've not really shown you much, but we'll explain a little bit more. And we'll just mention a little bit more about the reconstruction stuff. So since 2000, they've thought, right, actually what we need to do as we're excavating this landscape, let's see how it works. And personally, with the stuff that we've just mentioned, wouldn't it be great for somebody to get the right clay, to sort of build a Mesolithic building, to have a nice bit of a clay layer, to put the stakes in there, to sort of see how this went together, see how that worked. It would be a lot of effort to do that. However, they're doing experimental archaeology on site, holistic approach to understand the prehistoric world. And the statement here is when they said, I have found that activities often shed light on one another, as the solution to one problem suggests ways to solve another problem. And I'm so reminded, I haven't mentioned about anything that I've really done this week, and there's a lot happened, but just meant, and this leads me directly into something that happened on Tuesday. I was in my studio and this guy phoned me up a few days earlier. He said, can I meet you in your studio? And I said, yes. And he said, do you know I'm the author of the only person who's actually done the research and got all the information together for the shipwreck, the Frolic, the paddle steamer Frolic. And I'm thinking, hairs go up on the back of my neck, and I'm thinking, right, I'll just come along and tell you some of my findings because I need to get it published. And then I said, well, I'm a publisher. And he said, we've got, as I'm looking into one thing, it sheds light on another thing. And not to say too much about his research, but some of the stuff is in the public domain. The vessel went down under very suspicious circumstances. It wasn't as straightforward as being smashed to bits on Nash sandbank. By the Nash gutter there, it was not as simple as that. When the captain was found, he was found chained to a mast with his watch in his top pocket, stopped at 4 a.m. Of months onwards, bodies in groups of 2 would be washed up along the shoreline, because it looks like every single one in first class had been locked into their cabins. And what was happening as the ship is breaking down within the water, the cabin doors are opening to release 2 people's bodies, which are being washed up on the shoreline. And I'm not going to say much more, but back to this. One thing shed light on another, and that's exactly what he's been coming across. And the very important general that was on the ship, a certain General MacLeod, there's no record of him ever existing, and his body was never ever found, alongside a load of very senior military men on the vessel. So there's lots of strange things about that. So we were talking about that, and it's just like links me directly into
in
this.
storms, people would be locked into their cabins below.
Yes, they would be.
So that's not.
It's not unusual. No, that's not an unusual thing. I'm saying that is not the unusual thing. What I'm saying is that key bodies were not actually found associated with that vessel, and it's also likely that it was such a ferocious storm. The captain chained himself to the mast because he'd lost all of his crew. Because with a paddle steamer like that, there was just a very narrow rail alongside. The steerage passengers, the sort of poor passengers who were actually up on deck, so it just needed a storm and they would have just been all washed up alongside most of the crew.
What date was this?
This was 1831. Anyway, what I'm trying to say as a point, those are the interesting things that I do come across from week to week, and also I've now got the only footage. I know most of you are not going to be interested in this, but I've got the only footage surviving of the last train journey along the Sully to Penarth train line. Because in 1968, the train line closed, and within weeks, the entire train line was being ripped up, and bits of the train line was being occupied by residents of Penarth and Sully to make sure that the train never ever returned along that route. Exactly what happened with Cowbridge. People in Cowbridge didn't want the train line, so as soon as that was shut, they started seizing bits of the line. So hence, there'll never be a train going back to Cowbridge. But in Llantwit Major, people are very sensible. Moving on. So one thing that they've actually done, when they found the evidence of this tin smelting furnace, and they thought, right, we're going to be the first people in history. This is about 2010. We're going to be the first people in history to develop a tin furnace in Britain. It's been attempted in Poland, right, and other countries on the continent, right, but it's never been experimented in this country. So because the furnaces were sort of associated with the slope, what they decided to do as an experimental project at this site at Saveock, they decided to find a grassy slope. It had to be a grassy slope, mind, because the root systems keeping the grass intact along either side. And what they did, they cut a gully along the slope, a V-shaped gully along the slope. So what would happen is if you as you'd liked the furnace at the bottom, the updraft at the bottom would just go all the way through. You don't need bellows. So that would heat the furnace and it would melt anything in front. That was the theory. So you don't need bellows. So it was one of those sort of draft furnaces. So with the use of the volunteers, they actually did this. And there was a small bowl shaped furnace, and they built a shelter around it as well. And strange enough, to sort of stop any hot air seeping out of the furnace, what they did, they lined the trench with a hood, and you've got the furnace here. They lined it, and they must have put crucibles further up because that's where the heat's going. And they did all this, and strangely enough, it didn't work. It didn't work. The smelting experiments were not successful, and they worked out that maybe the angle of the slope wasn't right, the direction wasn't right for the smelting process, and lo and behold, they're still experimenting with these things in Italy, Poland, Lithuania, and Germany, in exactly the same areas where tin is found on the continent. And hopefully, I might be able to report a bit more on that in the future. So what we're going to do, I think we're going to do our break now, right? My logic is if we take a break 30 minutes earlier than usual, then we'll be finishing a lot earlier today. So this is the thing. So, right, we'll be looking at this next. But are there any questions?
No.
I think what it was, right, Dennis went off with Ellen last night.
Oh.
It's a bit strange because we saw both of them yesterday.
They were together.
Yes. Right, so we'll have a short break. Keith, go and put the kettle on, darling.
Okay, sir.
Don't die.
I'll try not to, I'll have a cough.
What we could do, we could do a Reese Mogg. You could have, Lynn, I can see it now, you could have a chair at the back, you could rest your back against it, and you could drape your legs over, and you could do a Reese Mogg. It would suit you.
Oh,
Is it open?
yes, bloody drafty.
Okay.
Of course, you asked me to bring the Day of Tapestry thing in, and he isn't here.
Do you know what? I
I'll
don't
leave it in the
respect
bag for next
all
week.
the people that have won raffle prize. Oh no, there's Steve. Isn't he?
Give them to somebody else.
What's that? Oh, look who turns up! Dennis, you won out. We actually started. No, actually, to be honest with you, I started. We started talking about 24 minutes past 10.
That was a record this morning.
So Dennis, right? Dennis is officially 1 hour late.
I'm sorry. I told you I've been feeling a bit weak lately.
At this point, I actually ran out of space on my recorder, so I'll do this as a continuation. We've planning to go to the Saveock site for an Archaeology Cymru excursion next year, and in the end of April, if anyone's interested. And then these slides themselves now, they're moving a pterograph pole from a really weird set of stones. It's almost as if underlying there's sequences of building walls, and directly on top of these huge, massive boulders in a linear line. And I particularly want to examine these. I don't really know much about them, and I don't think the archaeologists excavating there for well over a decade actually understand what they are either, which is not saying anything, because in archaeology it's just a matter of interpretation, really. So the area that that these next slides really look at have been excavated over that period, and when you look at them, you get a sense that they're very much out of place with the type of period of archaeology that we're talking about in the Iron Age. So the stones back there have been revealed due to probably an extension of a cutting which has revealed the wall that is due to a modern road that is actually down below it. So the next slide that we're going to actually look at, well, just make up your own mind what you feel when you see the next slide, and does it look like an alignment of stones that you'd actually see in Iron Age Britain? My gut tells me no. Oh, I'm not saying this has been faked at all. That's absolutely nonsense. These are actually found in the archaeology. They're genuine archaeology, dated to the Iron Age, and they look very strange, don't they? But you do get strange archaeology in Cornwall. So 2,000 years plus archaeology. Obviously, it's on other building contexts from earlier periods as well. Directly in front of those massive boulders, tons and tons in weight. You've almost, it's described in my notes, if I'm interpreting it right, that you've got an alignment of building rubble or some kind of a top of a wall underneath it. So it's actually looking back at the wall. You can see the linear line of wall across going across the middle of the picture, and directly underneath that you can see the pterograph pole that's been moved in the centre of the shot, and directly in front of that is like this modern roadway. Obviously not a major road, but it's an access road. And again, I was saying about in the lecture, I was saying the importance of that other contextual set of stonework there. Whenever you look at it, you think, well, is this a processional walkway in the Iron Age? Is it something else? It's definitely not defensive, so it's making your mind up on that. So we'll be seeing that feature. After that, I basically wanted to say Chysauster, notes about Chysauster there, and I basically looked at some reconstructed buildings which are nothing like the ones that are at Saveock from Chysauster, also in Cornwall. So there's an aerial view of Chysauster. So I think basically if anyone wants to get anything out of these next images, is to sort of cut frame them, and that's a bit more of a reconstruction of some of these buildings at diagonal sort of supported structures. So and I felt going back to the site Saveock, Sorry for the lack of continuity there. The pollen analysis readings here are fascinating. So if you get an opportunity, just freeze frame this, read about pollen analysis from the Saveock site in 2005. I thought it was great, telling you of the changes within a landscape, which I've been talking about for some time. And looking at this as well, looking at the analysis of pollen from these pits that I alluded to at the beginning. They found these really weird pits on the site, but I think these are probably actually from earlier. So the pollen analysis, not the pollen analysis, the continued sense of what's actually written here on here. And then we go over to the evidence about flints found on the site from one particular year, 2005. So I'd like to invite anyone to subscribe to support us. That's myself and Archaeology Cymru. We'll be doing stand-up archaeology sometime soon. This is Karl-James Langford. Really appreciate you watching, and thanks for your support.